I'm 75 now, and I can't remember anybody except the Queen being.
The room had been prepared for a routine vote. The papers were arranged, the signatures anticipated, and Camilla's elevation appeared all but guaranteed. Then Duchess Sophie placed one hand over the voting document and calmly said the process could not continue. No raised voice, no dramatic accusation. Just one devastating objection that froze the Royal Foundation's senior figures in place and forced the Queen Consort to confront the possibility that her most ambitious institutional move had just been stopped. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Sophie held her ground as the silence deepened. The Royal Foundation, a charitable organization created to coordinate major public causes connected to senior royals, was supposed to remain independent in its decisions. Yet the trusted confidant believed that independence was under threat. During the formal governance vote, she challenged Camilla's proposed appointment as a trustee, meaning a person legally responsible for guiding the charity. Before the ballots could be confirmed, Camilla had entered the meeting expecting approval, not resistance. The Queen Consort knew Charles had privately supported her nomination, and a leather folder containing the proposed amendment already rested beside her chair. Several board members had also received briefing notes presenting the appointment as a way to strengthen cooperation between the Crown and the Foundation. To her, the outcome had seemed settled before anyone lifted a pen. Sophie understood what her objection would cost. She looked across the table and met Camilla's stare, realizing that their careful politeness had ended. The Queen stopped turning the ring on her finger, leaned back, and asked whether the objection was procedural or personal. Her controlled voice carried an unmistakable accusation. Sophie answered by producing the missing correspondence. One documented letter, circulated through palace channels but withheld from the board packet, showed that Camilla's powers could extend beyond ceremonial oversight. The proposed role could influence appointments, funding priorities, and the Foundation's future direction. That was not honorary service. It was control. William closed his briefing document before anyone else could react. The prince did not defend Sophie, but he did not rescue Camilla either. He asked the secretary to suspend the vote, suggesting he already understood the hidden amendment's danger. Charles lifted his pen, hesitated, then set it down without speaking. The king watched the voting slips disappear, while Camilla waited for a defense that never came. Then, Sophie learned that the queen wanted her alone in the adjoining room. But before Sophie could face Camilla's anger, the struggle had to be understood through the people who now stood to lose far more than a single vote. To the outside world, the dispute appeared to concern a charitable appointment. Inside the royal household, it touched identity, loyalty, motherhood, marriage, and the future balance of power. Camilla saw the trustee role as proof that she had finally been accepted at the center of royal life. Sophie saw it as a line that could not be crossed. Catherine saw the foundation itself becoming the battlefield on which the next reign might be defined. Camilla remained seated after the meeting ended. She watched aides gather the abandoned papers while the leather folder beside her stayed closed. The trustee role, meaning a formal position with legal responsibility over the charity's direction, had offered something royal rank alone could not give her: permanence inside the structure most closely tied to William and Catherine's future leadership. Without it, she feared her influence could vanish the moment the next reign began. Sophie felt the weight of that fear, but she also understood why her objection mattered. She had built her standing through quiet service, careful preparation, and years of loyalty without spectacle. That was why her challenge carried such force. The trusted confidant was not known for public defiance. She acted only when she believed silence would place the institution itself in danger. Camilla saw the intervention differently. She believed a woman she had treated as an ally had chosen the most exposed moment to oppose her. The Queen Consort felt years of sacrifice collapsing into another humiliation, and the wound cut deeper because Sophie had delivered it calmly. There had been no anger to dismiss, no insult to condemn, only a refusal. Sophie stepped into the corridor and pressed her fingers against the edge of a table before facing Edward. The Duke of Edinburgh, a title held by a senior royal who supports the crown through public duty, saw immediately that she was shaken. She told him the family might call her disloyal. He answered that remaining silent would have been the greater betrayal. Catherine had already questioned the nomination in a private recorded conversation with William weeks earlier, but she had refused to file an objection. She feared resistance from her would be framed as a future queen, protecting her territory from the current one. Sophie's decision protected Catherine, but it placed the danger directly upon herself. William understood the stakes just as clearly. The prince wanted the foundation to represent a focused, transparent, and independent monarchy. Camilla's proposed powers could allow the current court to shape priorities meant to survive into his reign. Catherine found Sophie near the staircase and quietly took her hand. She asked whether she understood what Camilla might do next. Sophie said she did, and that was why the vote had to be stopped. Then Edward disclosed the truth. Charles had made Camilla a private promise months earlier, and the promise had begun with one private encounter, an incident so specific and consequential that everyone involved would later recognize it as the point of no return. The vote did not begin in a boardroom. It began months earlier, after a Windsor reception had ended, and the last guests had left the state apartments. In a small withdrawing room, Charles made Camilla a promise he believed would settle an old wound. Sophie entered moments later and heard enough to understand that the foundation was being drawn into a private bargain. From that night onward, the confrontation was no longer avoidable. It was merely waiting for a date. Camilla had spent the evening feeling pushed to the edge. At the Windsor Castle reception, a formal gathering held inside the royal residence to honor charitable leaders. She had been seated away from the principal Royal Foundation delegation. That group represented the charity most closely linked to William and Catherine's future public work. To her, the placement felt deliberate. It suggested that she was welcome as Queen Consort, but not trusted at the center of what would come next. Camilla confronted Charles after the guests had gone. She told him ceremonial appearances were no longer enough, and that titles could not protect her legacy once the next reign began. The Queen feared that years of work could be reduced to a footnote. The King had believed public recognition had settled that insecurity, but her anger showed him how deeply it remained. Charles answered from guilt as much as devotion. He told Camilla that he would support her nomination as a trustee, a person legally responsible for helping direct a charity. The promise sounded simple. In reality, it tied the monarch's private loyalty to an institution that was supposed to make its own decisions. Sophie entered to retrieve a briefing folder just as Charles said the matter would be settled before summer. The trusted confidant stopped. Camilla saw her in the doorway, and silence took control. Neither woman needed an explanation. Sophie had heard a royal promise being made about an independent vote. Sophie learned days later that the role was not merely symbolic. A documented draft sent through palace channels granted Camilla access to strategy meetings, influence over senior appointments, and power to request reviews of programs involving family welfare, domestic abuse, and community support. The proposal had circulated before the Foundation's full governance committee. The group responsible for supervising its rules had even seen it. Camilla approached Sophie during a later luncheon and asked whether she objected. Sophie replied that a promise made inside a marriage could not become an obligation for a charity. The Queen's expression hardened. She answered that loyalty sometimes meant understanding what should remain unchallenged. Sophie began keeping every revised draft. Then she found the final change. One hidden clause giving Camilla influence over the Foundation's future leadership transition. That hidden clause became the weapon Sophie carried into the vote, and the reason Camilla demanded a confrontation before anyone else could learn what had been uncovered. There were no advisors between them when Camilla entered the adjoining room, no board members, no secretaries, only two women who had spent years mastering restraint and who no longer had any reason to pretend the dispute was impersonal. Camilla closed the door herself, turned toward Sophie, and asked a single question. Did you come here today to protect the Foundation, or to prevent me from ever belonging to it? Camilla had refused every suggestion that she leave quietly. The Queen Consort wanted Sophie brought into the private sitting room, before the remaining trustees, the people legally responsible for governing the charity, could depart. She knew the suspended vote had already weakened her position. If the objection spread beyond that room, it could pull Charles, William, Catherine, and the future of royal charitable power into the same conflict. Sophie entered carrying the marked amendment. She understood that one wrong sentence could transform a contained dispute into a family rupture. Camilla did not wait. She accused the trusted confidant of humiliating her before board members who had already been encouraged to support the nomination. The Queen said the objection had made her appear grasping, untrusted, and unworthy of authority others had received without such resistance. Sophie absorbed the accusation, then answered with painful calm. She said the humiliation had not come from her objection. It had come from trying to pass an altered agreement without open discussion. Her voice shook only once, when she admitted she had hoped Camilla would withdraw before the vote forced everyone to choose a side. Sophie opened the document and pointed to the hidden leadership clause. It allowed the proposed trustee to influence reviews involving future chairs and executive appointments, meaning the people who would eventually control the foundation's direction. Camilla denied asking for that language, yet she did not deny knowing it had been inserted. Camilla then broke her silence through the private conversation itself. She admitted that Charles had encouraged palace lawyers to strengthen the role because he believed the foundation needed continuity between his reign and William's. The Queen called it stability. Sophie heard something else: pressure from the monarch being placed upon an independent board. Camilla reached for the document, but Sophie did not release it. For one charged moment, both women held opposite sides of the same page. Then Sophie placed it on the table and said, no marriage, title, or private promise could replace the consent of the trustees. Camilla stepped back, wounded by the refusal. She warned that Sophie had forced Charles to choose between his wife and those questioning his judgment. Outside the room, William was waiting. He had heard enough to know the king's involvement could no longer remain hidden. The argument had exposed the emotional wound, but the final decision would be controlled by a quieter force: the rules governing who could command the foundation and who could only ask. Camilla possessed rank. Charles possessed the crown, yet neither held the deciding vote. Behind the royal titles stood a structure deliberately built to protect charitable work from personal command. Sophie's objection had activated that structure, and now every signature, clause, and private instruction would be examined. The crisis was no longer about whether Camilla deserved recognition. It was about whether the monarchy itself would respect a boundary it expected everyone else to honor. Sophie had stopped the process by relying on one crucial distinction: the foundation's independent trustees, meaning the people legally responsible for its decisions, alone could approve appointments. Royal patronage could bring prestige, attention, and influence, but it could not automatically create governing power. The trusted confidant had forced the board to choose freely, before palace pressure turned expectation into fact. William understood that danger better than anyone. The prince was closely tied to the foundation's future and carried enormous moral authority inside it. Yet he refused to issue an order. If he directed the trustees himself, he would repeat the same pressure he believed had compromised Camilla's nomination. He wanted the board protected, even from him. Charles received the governance review in his private office. The document, a formal examination of how the appointment had been handled, traced the palace's involvement line by line. The king's face tightened as he reached the section describing the hidden clause. He placed the file down and stared ahead, realizing that his attempt to reassure his wife had endangered an institution his son viewed as central to the next reign. William entered, and chose every word carefully. He told his father that the dispute was not a judgment on Camilla's charitable work. It was a judgment on the method used to secure authority. Charles heard the distinction. He also heard the rebuke beneath it. The review then established something more damaging. An aide working between the king's household and Camilla's office had requested the expanded leadership clause, describing it in a documented email as necessary for future continuity. No trustee had approved that change. Sophie's archived drafts proved that the role had slowly shifted from honorary participation into real control. Charles asked whether Sophie had acted under William's instruction. The prince answered no. He added that her willingness to stand alone was exactly why the board trusted her objection. The king understood the warning immediately. Punishing Sophie would confirm that palace pressure had existed all along. Camilla then asked Charles to publicly reaffirm his support. He refused to issue a statement before the review ended. The Queen finally understood that he could not save the nomination without damaging himself and the foundation. By evening, the board secretary circulated the decision. Camilla's nomination had been formally withdrawn. The machinery had delivered its answer, but the emotional consequences arrived faster and struck far closer to home than any formal review could contain. The notice contained no accusation. It did not mention Sophie's objection, Charles's promise, or the hidden clause. It simply announced that Camilla's nomination would not proceed. Yet behind those restrained words stood a devastating reality. The Queen Consort had sought a permanent place within the institution, shaping the monarchy's future, and the institution had refused to grant it. What followed was not a public explosion, but something colder: distance, silence, and the collapse of trust. Camilla read the withdrawal notice alone. The formal statement, meaning the official written decision issued by the Foundation, confirmed that the trustee vote had been cancelled and that every outdated document had to be returned. Future governance proposals would also face independent legal review before palace offices could circulate them. The new safeguards mattered because they closed the path that had allowed private influence to reach the board in the first place. Camilla reached the final paragraph and folded the paper once, then again. The Queen Consort still held her public charitable role and ceremonial standing, but she would receive no decision-making authority inside the Foundation. A limited ambassadorial arrangement remained possible, meaning she could support selected causes publicly without controlling appointments, money, or strategy. When an aide asked whether she wished to respond, she said no and dismissed everyone. Charles entered later and found the trustee briefing folder untouched. The king asked whether she wanted to discuss what had happened. Camilla answered that the role no longer mattered. Her restraint made the opposite clear. She blamed Sophie for stopping the vote, but she also blamed him for failing to defend the promise he had made. Camilla's anger sharpened when a documented palace briefing showed that Catherine had known concerns existed weeks before the meeting. The princess had never filed an objection, yet the queen became convinced that Sophie had acted as protection for the Wales household. To her, the resistance now looked coordinated, even if the evidence did not prove it. Sophie faced consequences of her own. A private message from a senior courtier warned that members of Camilla's circle wanted her removed from an upcoming Foundation engagement. The request was rejected, but the trusted confidant understood what it meant. The dispute was no longer confined to papers. It had begun shaping invitations, access, and family cooperation. Sophie met Camilla at a reception 2 days later. She paused, ready to speak. The queen looked directly at her, then turned toward another guest. The rejection lasted seconds, but the fracture was unmistakable. Edward later asked whether Sophie regretted stopping the vote. She said she regretted the pain, not the decision. He told her that quiet loyalty sometimes meant refusing the person who expected obedience. Then Charles requested a private meeting with Sophie at Windsor. With every institutional voice removed, the crisis came down to one monarch, one duchess, and a conversation neither could survive unchanged. Charles did not summon Sophie to reprimand her. He asked her to sit beside the fire and waited until the door had closed before admitting what no official document could contain. He had known the appointment was becoming too powerful, but he had lacked the courage to withdraw a promise made to his wife. Sophie had done what he could not. That truth did not comfort him. It exposed the personal weakness at the center of the entire crisis. Charles wanted one answer before anything else. Had Sophie acted against Camilla personally, or would she have stopped any royal figure under the same circumstances? The private meeting at Windsor carried no formal agenda, meaning there was no official list of subjects or advisors guiding the exchange. That mattered because both knew the conversation had moved beyond procedure and into the painful territory of trust. Sophie answered without hesitation. She said the Foundation's independence mattered precisely because royal relationships carried so much weight. Once private promises began deciding trustee appointments, future boards would struggle to tell the difference between genuine service and personal entitlement. The trusted confidant made clear that she would have challenged anyone who crossed that line. Charles then broke his silence through the private conversation. He admitted that Camilla feared becoming irrelevant in the next reign. The king had supported the role because he wanted to give his wife something permanent, something William and Catherine could not quietly remove once power shifted. His confession exposed the truth. The nomination had been driven by devotion, guilt, and fear as much as strategy. Sophie did not celebrate the admission. She told Charles she understood his instinct to protect Camilla, but the Foundation could not be used to settle an emotional debt. The monarch lowered his head and accepted the judgment. For once, there was no title powerful enough to soften it. Charles then revealed that Camilla had asked him to distance Sophie from future Foundation discussions. He had refused. The king told her that whatever tension followed, her objection had been legitimate, and her place within the family would not be reduced. Charles also disclosed that the Foundation would adopt a written prohibition, meaning a formal rule banning trustee appointments arranged through private royal promises. Sophie's intervention would become permanent policy, not a temporary exception. Charles handed her the original note he had written after the Windsor reception and asked her to burn it. Sophie returned it. She said the person who made the promise had to be the one who ended it. Charles stared at the paper, then tore it in half. By morning, however, the suspended vote had reached the front pages. What had begun behind closed doors was now about to be judged in public, where restraint could look like courage, cruelty, loyalty, or betrayal, depending on who told the story first. By sunrise, the secrecy was gone. Broadcasters led with the suspended vote, commentators debated the limits of royal influence, and newspapers transformed Sophie's quiet objection into a national confrontation. One photograph captured the public imagination. Sophie leaving the foundation offices alone, shoulders straight, while Camilla's car remained motionless behind the gates. To some, it showed courage. To others, calculated disloyalty. Either way, the image made clear that the monarchy's internal balance had shifted. Sophie watched the coverage beside Edward and felt increasingly uneasy. Palace communications had confirmed that Camilla would not become a foundation trustee, describing the withdrawal as a governance decision, meaning an official judgment about how the charity should be controlled. The statement avoided direct blame, but it also confirmed one unavoidable fact. The trusted confidant had stopped the appointment. Edward noticed how the headlines reduced everything to a personal battle. One paper called it Sophie versus Camilla, while another presented her as a rebel inside the House of Windsor, the royal family's ruling dynasty. She had acted to defend the foundation's independence, yet the public story now focused on rivalry, ambition, and old wounds. He reminded her that simple headlines often hid difficult truths. She answered that Camilla would not see it that way. Camilla received the same coverage before a scheduled engagement. The Queen Consort considered canceling, but she refused to let the withdrawal appear to defeat her publicly. She arrived smiling, greeted the waiting crowd, and continued with the program. Yet when reporters called questions about the foundation, she turned toward the hosts and spoke only about the day's charitable work. The argument changed that evening. A broadcaster displayed the altered trustee clause and explained how it could have influenced future leadership appointments. The document shifted attention away from personality and toward power. A former charity commissioner then praised the board in a recorded television interview for refusing to let royal rank bypass ordinary governance. His words gave Sophie's objection outside legitimacy and made any reversal dangerously difficult. Outside Buckingham Palace, newspaper sellers raised a front page carrying the photograph of Sophie leaving alone. The headline read, "The Duchess Who Said No." One woman lifted the paper above her head, and others near the railings applauded. The moment became the public symbol of the crisis. Camilla watched the replay from a private room. She muted the television before Sophie's name was spoken and remained seated, realizing that her private defeat had become a national lesson in accountability. But headlines could not deliver the final answer. The vote had been stopped, the promise destroyed, and the public verdict delivered. But one final encounter would determine whether the moment ended in permanent division or a harder form of royal acceptance. The final reckoning came without cameras, statements, or another vote. At a family gathering weeks later, Sophie entered a drawing room and found Camilla standing alone near the window. For the first time since the confrontation, neither woman turned away. The trustee role was gone. The hidden clause had been abolished. Charles had accepted responsibility. What remained was more difficult than victory or defeat: the need to acknowledge what had happened and decide what it would mean. Camilla spoke first. The Queen Consort said she still believed the objection could have been handled privately, away from the board, and without the humiliation that followed. Sophie answered that the nomination itself had been advanced through private promises, leaving the formal vote as the only place where it could be stopped openly. The foundation had now adopted new governance protections, meaning clear rules requiring transparent nominations, independent review, and written separation between palace requests and trustee decisions. Sophie remained involved in the charity and received no punishment for speaking out. Her survival inside the institution mattered because it proved that royal service did not demand blind obedience. The trusted confidant had challenged power without rejecting duty, and the new rules ensured that no future appointment could be shaped in the same hidden way. Camilla lowered her voice and admitted, through that private conversation, what had driven her from the beginning. She had feared becoming irrelevant once the next reign began. The Queen had wanted something permanent, something that could not be erased when William and Catherine assumed greater control. Sophie expressed sorrow for the pain and humiliation, but she did not apologize for stopping the appointment. Permanence, she said, could not be secured through authority over another couple's legacy. Camilla accepted a limited ambassadorial relationship with selected charitable programs. The arrangement allowed her to support causes publicly, but gave her no trustee vote, appointment power, or control over strategy. She would remain visible, without crossing the boundary that had caused the crisis. Camilla extended her hand before leaving. Sophie took it. The gesture was formal, not warm, but it ended the deliberate silence between them. Neither woman had won everything. Both understood the terms on which the family could continue. Charles joined them moments later and thanked Sophie for attending. The king's presence confirmed that the decision was settled royal policy, not a temporary retreat. Camilla did not object. The monarchy emerged bruised but stronger. Charles learned that love could not justify institutional pressure. Camilla learned that belonging could not be guaranteed through control. Sophie proved that loyalty was not silence, but the courage to protect the crown from decisions made in its name. And when the room finally emptied, there was nothing left to dispute. The foundation remained independent. Sophie's stand was vindicated, and the royal family understood exactly where duty ended and personal power could go no further. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.